Welcome to On the Issues. I'm your host, Nicholas Balsi, at the Election Bowl Results Party, sponsored by the Student Government Association, University Democrats, and College Republicans at Rider University. Soon we're going to be talking to some students about their perspectives on the race and the candidates that they're supporting. First up, we have Kyle Battaglia. He's a member and former intern of the Hamilton Republican Committee. Kyle, thanks for joining me on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, I think we'll sit down, we'll talk about your support for John McCain in this election. What draws you to him and his policies?
Well, for as long as I can remember, as long as John McCain's been a public servant, he's been a consistent conservative, but he's been someone who's been able to reach across the aisle and, work in a bipartisan manner and kind of come together and bring both parties together on important issues facing the country, and that'll bode well for the general election, where you're not just going to try to attract Republicans. You need to attract independents and Democrats to win the national election. So he can get the support of Republicans and get the support of people on the fringe. So that's one of the reasons why I'm supporting him.
Are there any specific issues that you think he stands out on?
Well, John McCain's been a strong supporter of the troop surge in Iraq, which has started out with a lot of criticism, but now it's proved to have been the right position on the issue because violence has been reduced and troops are starting to hand over power to Iraqis in provinces. So he's been consistent on the issue, and it's proved to be the right position.
I mean, I think he talks tougher on defense, arguably than George W. Bush does. Would you say that under a McCain administration we would see even more spending on defense compared to George W. Bush?
I'm not sure, because right now we're starting to go in a transitional period in Iraq where we're starting to win. So I think towards the end of the month or towards the spring, 42,000 troops are going to be coming home. So in the long run, it might not be necessary to spend more money. We'll have to see what happens with the rest of the surge, if the political benchmarks can be met as well as the military benchmarks.
Do you think that McCain will look toward other possible countries who are harboring terrorists and use military force there? Because he's made jokes like bomb Iran and stuff like that, and that caused a lot of controversy. So does he have that kind of nature and tendency about him in your mind?
Well, he's definitely a hawk. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I think he's in the beginning of the Iraq War, he was a critic of the war for the way it was handled. So I think he's learned from that process and would not maybe rush to war with Iran. He would wait and see if they definitely have a nuke, or if there were definitely strong connections between Hezbollah and Israel and Iran. Stuff like that. He's not going to drag, I hate to say it like this, not going to drag Colin Powell in front of the United Nations to justify a war, along those lines. But it's definitely an option. We need to be aggressive in our foreign policy and our military policy. We can't be on the defense. That's what happened with 9/11.
He said during the campaign rally that he had in Hamilton that he would find bin Laden if he had to go through the fiery gates of hell. Why do you think we're not hearing much about Osama bin Laden from the Bush administration, and then we're hearing it from a candidate like John McCain?
I think for a lot of Americans, we've seen success in Afghanistan, where the Taliban has been overthrown and Al-Qaeda has been, for the most part, rooted out, and the focus has been shifted towards Iraq. But McCain, like I said before, McCain was initially a critic of the war in Iraq for several reasons, and he was more for finishing the job in Afghanistan. But now, that would probably be a bigger priority. Once more troops are returned home from Iraq and Iraq is stabilized, we can go back and put more effort into finding Osama bin Laden, because he's the face of the organization, but he might not be the one calling all the shots anymore. There might be bigger fish to fry, but he's an important target, because as far as morale of the Islamists we're fighting, that would be a big blow.
And what issues are on your mind mostly?
I think staying on the offense against terrorism, but at the same time respecting the Constitution, because for over 200 years the Constitution has stood strong in the face of all kinds of threats to America, and we need to continue to respect that document, but at the same time find a nice balance to where we can still be on the offense in the war on terror. And secondly, the economy. I think for a lot of people, they're skeptical about what's happening now with the economy. I mean, you turn on the news, you hear all negative things, you hear bad press, but are we really heading into recession, or is that just something that the media is escalating? I think that we're headed in the right direction, not necessarily maybe specifics-wise with this economic stimulus package, but definitely the economy it's not the biggest issue, it's the second biggest issue behind the war.
people say they're so fed up with George W. Bush and his administration. We see it in the polls. But do you think a Republican, a traditional Republican, would actually cross over the aisle and vote for Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama?
I think Barack Obama has a stronger chance of attracting Republicans than Hillary Clinton because the Clinton name is like synonymous with evil and misdeeds and not good government in the eyes of many conservatives. So if she were the nominee, as much as conservatives tend not to like John McCain, they would flock and they would come out in like busloads to vote for McCain because Ronald Reagan had a great quote where, just because somebody's with you 80% of the time doesn't mean they're your enemy 20% of the time. So they're gonna vote for McCain no matter what.
So you think Republicans would actually come out with the sole purpose of making sure Hillary doesn't become the president?
Right. It would not be tolerated among conservatives and Republicans throughout the country.
And I mean, we've seen that Obama does better with independents. So I understand where you're coming from with that. But then, you see some reports saying, well, Obama may not be able to carry as much weight because of his inexperience. What would you say about that?
Well, I mean, as much as I hate this argument, Obama is very charismatic. He's a great speaker. He attracts large crowds. He's on the outside, he's a perfect candidate. But the people who like him for those reasons don't really know much about him, which I guess is a kind of a bad thing in the long run. But people, I think, also are disillusioned with Hillary Clinton because for the past, if we had 4 years of first President Bush, then 8 years of Clinton, now 8 years of George W. Bush. So do we really want to keep power in the hands of those two families for another 4 to 8 years? So I think that's also in a lot of minds of voters who are on the fence between Hillary and Obama, and then between Hillary and John McCain, who's the presumed nominee of the Republican Party. So that also plays a big role in where they're going to vote.
Last but not least, we see a candidate like Huckabee had a lot of pull and a lot of press going after he won in Iowa, and now we don't hear too much about him right now. Why do you think conservatives aren't necessarily drawn to him as much as they are McCain?
I think McCain is a common, household name for a lot of Republicans, whereas Huckabee is kind of like this fresh face, like a flash in the pan. But I think a lot of people are kind of backing away from him because he's kind of shady on immigration and his economic policy. I think the fair tax, he wants to abolish the IRS and create a consumption tax, which a lot of people are kind of skeptical about too. So, I mean, he's got a lot of good ideas. He does a lot for the party. He's a strong evangelical base, but people, I think, are maybe trying to move away from that core of the party and focus more on foreign policy experience because Huckabee is lacking in that area, whereas McCain, like I said, he's been in the Senate since 1987 and he served in Vietnam. He has lots of military experience to handle the Iraq situation.
And do you think with that situation, we're still going to see foreign policy dominate this campaign and national security?
Definitely. I mean, 9/11 changed the way the world thinks about, military policy, homeland security and stuff like that. So it's always going to be in the back of people's minds because, like the bumper sticker says, never forget 9/11. How can anybody forget where they were that day, whether in school or at work? Now, I mean, if you go to ride an airplane, you have to wait in long lines to be checked, random searches. There's talk of a national ID, tamper-proof ID card, or having mandatory passports. So, I mean, the world has changed for the better or for the worse since 9/11.
I've been to quite a few rallies, Republican and Democrat, when they come to New Jersey or Pennsylvania. And I noticed that at these Republican rallies, compared to the Democrats, they're always talking about, when I lay my head on the pillow at night, I don't want to be afraid of another terrorist attack or somebody bombing my family or this and that. And they keep talking about these situations about being bombed and this and that. Do you think they might be using the fear a little too much in that kind of rhetoric?
I can see, yes, because I mean, the politicians are not stupid. They know what works and what doesn't work. So I can see them exploiting that for a little bit. But as far as using it solely to become elected, I think a majority of Americans would see through that. John McCain is a perfect example. He supported the surge in the beginning when it was not the popular decision, when Iraq was such a negative issue that people were just so disgusted with it. Now it's proven that it's worked, and people have come around to him, and he's attracting independents and soft Democrats and moderate and conservative Republicans alike. So it's hard to say if it's really being exploited to a large extent.
And look at him. They said that he was down, and people were saying he should pull out of the race, and now look at him. He's the front runner. So I guess that persistence really showed.
It did. I mean, he's been consistent with his policies his entire career, and it's paid off for him now in the long run.
Well, Kyle, thanks for sitting down with us and talking
Thanks
about
for
the
having me.
issues. Thanks a lot. Next up, we have Josh Hersha. He's a college Republicans vice president, and he was an intern for Bob Martin in the 15th Legislative District of New Jersey. Thanks for coming on the show, Josh.
No problem, Nick. How you doing?
Not bad. Just enjoying the event here and watching the returns come in. Josh, you're supporting Ron Paul in this election.
I am.
Wanted to talk about those specific issues that you think Ron Paul stands out on compared to the other candidates.
Yeah, I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk about Ron Paul. He's pretty much ignored in the media. The problem that I see in our country is that we have become very entrenched in other nations' affairs. For example, we have been in Korea for 50 years, ever since the end of the war. We see no end in troop presence in Germany. We see no end in troop presence in bases in Japan. I don't understand why we're in these countries when we trade with them, we have free commerce with them. Why do we need to have troops all over the world when we have we have to protect ourselves at home, especially with a strong military, and the money that is used overseas could be used here at home for domestic issues. So Congressman Paul has a great idea in supporting local governments, the state governments, and giving back the rights and the money instead of borrowing money from China to pay off, say, Pakistan or support another war in Pakistan. We should bring our troops home. I think that's a strong message.
What about Iraq, too? I think he was talking about he wanted to retreat also from Iraq under that same kind of premise. What do you think about that as well?
I agree. I think Iraq has been greatly mismanaged. I mean, our party was a party of bringing troops home. In Korea, we were elected, the Republicans were elected to bring our troops home from Korea. In Vietnam, Nixon was elected to bring the troops home from Vietnam. And we have a strong history of non-interventionist foreign policies. It's what's known as blowback. Whenever the CIA or the government institutes a policy or invades a country, we have what's known as blowback. Our country gets negative results as a return of our investment for something. The CIA was instrumental in kicking out the Shah in Iran, and we instituted our own puppet government in Iran in the 50s, and that has been blown back today. President Ahmadinejad is a crazy radical leader, but he's doing a lot of bad things, and this is a direct result of what we have done overseas in the last 50 years. It'd be much better. I'm not talking about isolationism. I'm talking about non-interventionism. When our government talks freely, trades freely. Look at us with Vietnam. They've got McDonald's and Burger King, and we were at war with them for 12 years. We need to talk freely with nations. No two nations that trade with each other ever really go to war because they depend on each other. It's important. And free market economics is really the way to go.
Now, do you think that another candidate has any kind of these ideas? Have you heard any kind of ideas out of other candidates similar to anything Ron Paul says as far as foreign policy?
No, not really. The libertarian wing of the Republican Party has been greatly ignored. It's disheartening to know that Governor Huckabee is he's a very religious man, he's a very good man, he does stand on a lot of good things like abolishing the IRS, but the problem that I have with all the candidates, we'll start with Governor Huckabee. Huckabee's main concern is having this anti-abortion and anti-gay marriage federal constitutional amendment, when in the Constitution, marriage and abortion rights are not written in the Constitution. So I think I'm a states' rights person. I think each state should decide what the requirements are on abortion and other issues. Your personal interests and your personal religion should not be entangled in the federal Constitution. I'm very strongly against that. Governor Romney is a former governor of Massachusetts. He's a very smart man. He did work hard in business, but I don't believe that his views from Massachusetts, he looked directly in the camera in 1994 and said, I don't want to return to Reagan-Bush. I'm pro-life. I'll be more pro-life than Ted Kennedy. And now he's running as this very religious, very anti-abortion candidate, when not too long ago he was very, very for it. And John McCain, I have some serious concerns about our length of stay in Iraq. He said, why not 100 years? And it's bad when my candidate doesn't want to stay 100 more days. And my other concern is McCain-Feingold places restrictions on freedom of speech, and I think the First Amendment should not be abridged. Thomas Jefferson said something that was, I think, very important. Alliances with all, alliances with none, commerce with all. and we need to start trading with countries. That's how we return our presence in the world.
What I find interesting is that out of all the candidates, even on the Democratic side, that are in the race currently, Ron Paul's actually the only anti-war candidate because he stood up in front of Congress, as you know, and he said, here are, I believe it was 25 questions that we didn't ask about Iraq before we went in. And, Obama wasn't there to vote. Hillary voted for the authorization, and we know all the Republican candidates voted for it as well.
And supported it actively.
And actively supported it. Romney, not because he's governor, but the ones that could vote, did. So why do you think America isn't gravitating over to somebody like Ron Paul, other than the fact that he's not getting as much media coverage, knowing that he's in all these debates, he's the only anti-war candidate? And the public doesn't approve of this war, clearly.
The major concern that people have in the Republican Party is trying to admit a mistake, I think. And since President Bush was was the constructor of the war and very instrumental in everything, all the policies with the war, I think a lot of Republicans don't want to lose face on it. I think that a lot of people still do support the president in the Republican Party, and they don't want to go back on the war on terror. I think the war on terror has been skewed to Iraq. I campaigned for President Bush in 2000. I campaigned for him in 2004, and since then I've left that follow drinking tea, Kool-Aid part of the party. I think that we have to look back and say, hey, look, I think Iraq was a distraction. I think it's also brought us into bigger problems with Pakistan, where a lot of Al-Qaeda and former Afghanistani members moved to in the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda is getting a strong presence in Pakistan. It's brought us into a lot of international problems with these countries that we don't even have strong alliances with. I think that's really what a lot of Republicans think, that if we stay there longer, especially McCain, he's very hawkish. We want to still go in and we can still fight and win. But I don't think admitting a mistake is a fault. I think admitting a mistake is what adults do, and that's why we should turn against the current trend of trying to put more troops in. I mean, the surge did work, but the problem with the surge is that in areas where there wasn't a surge, just say it was 80% Sunni and 20% Shiite, the 80% Sunni killed all the 20% Shiite. So now it's a stable area because one person has control and has basically wiped out the areas. In southern Iraq, it's empty because the British pulled out. And it's actually a lot more peaceful because the government controls the area. So, it's clear that the American public doesn't want to get a black eye like we did in Vietnam, especially in the Republican Party, but I think it's not a fault. It's what we should do.
Well, for a minute, let's just backtrack to 9/11 happens. It's blamed on Al-Qaeda. George W. Bush and his administration go after Afghanistan with about 25,000 troops. We move over to Iraq with 150,000 troops. No bin Laden, no Al-Qaeda. It's still on the run. We're knee-deep in Iraq.
Absolutely.
Why is that scenario not something that you think even the Republican Party is paying much attention to? They're still, in general, saying, let's support a candidate like McCain who wants to stay in Iraq for 100 years.
I think that people are willing to overlook. A lot of people are, again, Republicans are trying to support the war, but I think a lot of people, especially independents, are willing to overlook McCain's fault, I guess, his general fault, because a lot of people who are anti the war support McCain because of his maverick positions on the environment, free speech, McCain Feingold, McCain Kennedy. He's worked across the aisle, and I think people are willing to hold their noses, especially on the war issue, and support somebody who is much more in the center and tries to work on both sides of the aisle and is clearly a bipartisan person. So I think they're willing to overlook that. But I don't see many hardcore Democrats giving the opportunity, the White House back to the Republicans another 4 years or maybe even 8 years. I see it as this year's going to be a galvanizing force on both sides to either try and keep the White House on our side or try and capture the White House. And I can see the independent vote as the real swing. What do they want? Somebody who's a Republican or a Democrat. And I think that's really what we're going to get down into. I don't think that McCain really represents the Republican Party. I think he represents a good bipartisanship. I like his bipartisanship. I like his stances on the environment. But his what disheartens me is the thinking that a lot of Republicans are like McCain. A lot of them are firebrands, and a lot of them are Christian. As you can tell, especially with Mike Huckabee supported in the South, a lot of them are Christian conservatives. So a lot of them might hold their noses and vote for McCain, but that's I guess it's like it's a inside of our party is like what happened in 2004 with the Democrats. They're trying to choose what part of the party is going to be represented by the presidential candidate. So it's interesting to see that dynamic back and forth.
Ron Paul wants to, from what I understand, pretty much do away with taxes. Am I correct?
Correct.
And McCain says, let's cut taxes, really wants to cut taxes on all forms, on all platforms. And he also said we should get rid of the alternate minimum tax, I believe. So what about Ron Paul's radical stance on taxes? Do you think that is justified, or is that turning voters away?
I think a lot of people would like Ron Paul's stances on his tax policy rather. There's two candidates that are anti the IRS, Mike Huckabee and Congressman Paul. Mike Huckabee wants to do away with the IRS and institute a national sales tax, 23% national sales tax, which I don't think would be the right approach. Senator McCain, his idea is to cut spending first before he starts cutting taxes. The alternate minimum tax is a tax on people in a certain tax bracket, but it turns out because of inflation that tax bracket has included the middle class. So it's like 75,000, 125,000. Don't exact me on the numbers, but a lot of people in the middle class are now making that wage, which is like an extra tax on the middle class. So alternate minimum tax would definitely be something we should cut out. And then and Congressman Paul's idea is to cut the IRS and not replace it with anything. At current levels in 2000, if we eliminate the IRS right now, in 2000, in the year 2000, we had the same revenue if we cut the IRS out. And I think that's a good argument. In 2000, we had a great economy. We had a fair system here. And if we eliminate the IRS, every time you get your paycheck, whatever you earn, you get to keep. I think that's an important thing. I don't think that the national sales tax is such a good idea, the consumption tax, or it's called the fair tax. It's not fair at all. It actually hurts the lower classes of people who don't have that much money. Inflation is the thing that really, Congressman Paul, monetary policy, backing the dollar with gold. Him and Ronald Reagan used to sit down and talk about this when Congressman Paul first campaigned for him in 1976. They sat down and talked about monetary policy. The problem is right now that the dollar isn't backed with gold, and every year inflation rises. It was a very famous story that the United States and Canada had the same exact exchange rate the first time that's ever happened. We lost so much ability that our dollar is not trusted in Europe. It's like $1.30 or 40 in Europe for €1. The European Union has valued our dollar, and trading is very difficult. It's very expensive, and the wages from 10 years ago are the same, but inflation has increased. You're making $10 an hour in 1998, and you're making $10 an hour in 2008. You can't buy as much stuff. People shouldn't have to choose between paying their bills or going to the movies or something like that. You should be able to make enough money and work. If you work hard enough, you should be able to make enough money to have a little bit of luxury, but also still be able to pay down your bills and not go into debt. So I think that's another important thing. We need to back our dollar on something. And that's something that Congressman Paul's been pushing very, very steadfastly, and I agree with him on that.
Critics of President Bush would say, he claims to be so conservative and traditionally conservative, but yet this administration has spent more money than we can even remember. The defense spending is worse than World War II. So he claims to be conservative. Yet all these other candidates who are in the race say they're so conservative, but they're talking about cutting taxes. They're talking about rebates and defense spending and increasing the budget in the military. And when you think about it, that's just billions and billions and billions, and the deficit's getting wider and wider and wider. Why do you feel these candidates are able to justify this spending when they're also saying, hey, we're conservative, we're supposed to be conserving money?
There's a famous saying that when President Bush 41, got elected, it's we're running the same thing as Democrats, but we're doing it 10% cheaper. It shouldn't be about that. I think the party has lost its way, the Republican Party, and we followed Bush, and we especially members of Congress who are of the Republican Party, for the last 10, 12 years that we controlled the House, basically just followed whoever the leader was, whether it was Newt Gingrich back in 1994 or the current president. We've carried water for him, and it hurt us because we weren't able to say, this is wrong, we shouldn't be increasing the burden on our generation who's going to be paying off this debt. We shouldn't be borrowing from China, and they haven't really been listening to the true fiscal backbone of the party. Those people in New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut, the Republicans, we aren't crazy religious zealots like we are in Georgia or other parts of the state, other parts of the country rather. We're fiscal conservatives. We believe in limited government. And the bureaucrats in Washington didn't listen to that, and that's why they lost in 2006. And that's why President Bush is so unpopular. He increased a lot of spending. He's what's known as a compassionate conservative, not a fiscal one. He thinks it's necessary to borrow for these things when there's people like myself think it's like in a household. If you're only making $40,000 a year, you shouldn't be buying $70,000 worth of things. You need to be able to pay off your debt a little bit and pay off your credit card bills and pay for spending. If something comes up, you need to be able to pay for that. We shouldn't always put it on the credit card. The federal rebate program to quell the economy is $150 billion borrowing to give us all rebate checks. Right. I don't think that's a good idea either. A lot of these things that Republicans in Washington believe, whereas the rest of the people in the party don't believe. We're a big tent party, so there's a lot of discussion about what the direction of the party is going in. But I don't think the way that President Bush and the Republicans in Congress have done things was the right way. Ron Paul was one of the only no votes in the House on both parties against the war in Iraq. He never votes for a tax increase. Him and Dennis Kucinich, a former candidate for the presidency who recently dropped out, was on foreign policy. They agree, and they're usually two nay votes. The only two nay votes in the entire House of Representatives. And that shows you something about principle. Even though you're obviously going to lose because everyone else agrees, you still don't go along with it. It's important to stand up for your principles and stand up for what you believe in. So, strong monetary policy, you should only pay as you go, limited spending, smaller government. All these things resonate with people, but it's hard to get your message out when candidates like McCain have such presence and such broad appeal. It's hard to say, hey, look, this is the way it really should be. We should be following the Constitution. No one wants to listen to that argument when McCain has, a very broad appeal against Democrats and could possibly win. So it's hard for a libertarian type candidate to get a voice, really.
Well, thanks again, and
no problem.
Appreciate you coming on the show and getting Ron Paul's message out.
Anytime.
Now I'm here with Charles Burton. He's the vice president of the University Democrats and an intern with the Hillary campaign and at the governor's office. Charles, I want to thank you for taking some time to sit here.
Thank you, Nick.
What issues concern you the most, and why do you feel Hillary is the most qualified on those issues?
The first thing I want to say, Nick, is we have some really qualified candidates this year running for the Democratic nomination. It's important to point out that this is the first time since 2000 or even 1992 that we have two or more really strong candidates vying for the nomination and basically giving the voters a choice as to what direction we want the Democratic Party to go into. But my choice between both Senator Obama and Senator Clinton is Hillary, just based on her experience and the experiences of her lifetime. I think Senator Obama has some valuable experience as a community organizer in some desolate parts of Chicago, in the state legislature in Illinois, and with his few years in the U.S. Senate. But for Hillary, it's been more than that. For Hillary, it's been the past 6 years or 7 now in the U.S. Senate, but it's also been her time as First Lady. What does that mean? We hear that a lot, but how do you qualify it? We qualify it by pointing out the fact that as First Lady, she brought a lot of issues to the forefront that you find many U.S. senators not bringing to the forefront. Going around the world and traveling with State Department delegations to talk about human rights and civil rights, talking about genocidal issues and the rebuilding of areas in the Balkans, in Africa, in Northern Ireland, or in Asia. She brought many issues to light that she wasn't required to do, but she wanted to do as First Lady. Her lifetime is all about wanting to step up, wanting to be strong, and wanting to be significant in other people's lives and playing a formidable role in our nation's politics and in the international arena. And this started when she was First Lady of Arkansas. If you're familiar with her biography, you know that she'd be one of the first people in this country, her and her husband, to push for microloans, which helps the most impoverished people gain some kind of loan-based financing for startup businesses to give them the benefit of the doubt and help them out. She talked about education in Arkansas, and her education task forces in Arkansas were meaningful. I mean, the reason why Bill Clinton was a strong candidate for the presidency in 1992 is the fact that he took Arkansas, a state that ranked at around 50 or 48 of the 50 states, and brought it up to be a competitive state in terms of business climate, in terms of education and healthcare. So her entire life has been character tests, policy tests, and really tests of an individual who wasn't expected to do well. You know, a famous story is she applied to Harvard Law School, but they told her they had enough women, so she went to Yale. And she distinguished herself so much that she was asked to be on the special Watergate prosecutorial task force right out of law school. And from there, she was asked to be the first partner of Rose Law Firm, the first law firm in the state of Arkansas historically. So her entire life is about challenges and then taking it to the next level and becoming the woman she is today, a woman who can dominate and transcend American politics now and in the future.
Now, getting on the issues, because obviously that's what the show is about, what would you say about the war in Iraq, Hillary's support for the war initially, voting for military force on that resolution to disarm Iraq? You
know, frankly, that's a very divisive issue. You have some strong Democrats, and it must be said because it's common knowledge, that did not support the war, that did not trust the President of the United States. But here you have a U.S. senator, a new senator in the U.S. Senate, who said, I'm going to give the President the benefit of the doubt. There were significant threats with Saddam Hussein at the time, although now, as we're learning, there were conventional threats, not so much unconventional threats, such as weapons of mass destruction. And she said, I'm going to trust the President. And to be honest with you, I think part of her decision was based on the fact that she understands what the U.S. presidency is about, from supporting her husband and advising her husband and representing her husband around the world. And I think in the final analysis, we're finding out, and we're going to continue to find out, that the President of the United States lied to her. The President of the United States did not do a good job in ensuring that we had the best intelligence to go to war, and she gave the President the benefit of the doubt, and she got burned on that. And you know, I think the next question would be, and I'm sure you might ask, and that is, why hasn't she taken it back? You know, Hillary Clinton is a consistent individual, and she's been consistent in her dedication to education, to human rights, to health care, and she's consistent on matters of security and matters of state. And basically, by her voting for that war in Iraq, she took a stand that I think she might regret now, but at the end of the day, she's not going to leave our troops stranded, not until the President provides a strong enough policy that ends that quagmire.
Now, is her universal health care plan doable?
I think her universal health care is doable. You know, listen, a lot of people criticize her for her work in 1993 and 1994, but a lot of people forget the fact that you had Reagan's conservative Surgeon General, General Koop, supporting her plan. She had initial support from all the committees in Congress that she went before to testify about her plan. And the only problem with her plan initially was that it was a hard plan to put down into legislation and to enforce. But the ideas behind it weren't bad. The motivation and the need for it wasn't unfounded. And I think her plan now is a growth of that original plan. I mean, her and her husband were the only ones who were seriously talking about reforming our healthcare system in America in the early 1990s. And here she is now, 15 years later, promoting a new plan, a better plan, and a stronger plan that Americans desperately need. And I think it's going to be one of the most important issues in this presidential race. And I think it's going to be something she's going to be able to champion as our president.
Will she raise taxes?
We're in a situation now in the United States where we have a deficit approaching about $412 or $410 billion. We have a president who wants to raise spending while cutting taxes and providing stimulus in the form of tax rebates, but there's no money coming in.
And conducting two wars at the same time.
And conducting two wars at the same time, along with operations around the world. A lot of people don't think of this, but we have a high number of conventional forces in Southeast Asia. We still have a high number of conventional forces in Europe, in Germany actually, and we have conventional forces in other places around the world to maintain our presence in this global society. So defense spending is extremely significant. As you know, just the other day the president has released his last budget of his presidency, and for the first time ever, defense spending is going to be over $500 billion. And as bad as it is to say this, I think taxes may go up a little bit, but I think they do need to go up a little bit. We're at a point in America where, no, I don't think we should tax the rich an arm and a leg to pay for every program and every initiative. However, there are a lot of people who are not paying enough taxes. You have Warren Buffett who goes around this country and he says, I'm paying less taxes than my secretary. A secretary I pay well, but she's paying more than me. I don't think that's fair. And that's Warren Buffett, a man who's the second wealthiest man in the entire world, and a moderate guy himself. He's not, a leftist like George Soros. So if he's talking that way, how bad is the real problem? I think America is lucky that we have 15,000 families earning in salary alone over $9 million a year. There's certainly taxable revenue out there that the United States government needs to utilize to continue paying for itself. With a weakening dollar, with a debt approaching a ceiling of $10 trillion and operating deficits approaching $500 billion each and every fiscal year, we're in a situation where we have to truly reevaluate our tax code, how we raise money, how we pay for programs, and if some reasonable tax increases are necessary, I think it's something we have to consider.
All right, well, Charles, I want to thank you for coming on and talking about Hillary, and I'm
Thank
sure
you,
she'll
Nick.
have no problem tonight in the primaries. Now we're here with Jonathan Chabra. He was an intern for former Congressman Mike Fitzpatrick in the 8th District. John, I want to thank you for taking some time to come on the show.
My pleasure, Nick.
So let's talk about Barack Obama and his stances on the issues of the day. Why are you supporting Barack Obama?
I'm supporting Barack Obama because I feel that he's the candidate that we need in the United States to take us into this new era that we're coming into as a nation. I feel like this is a real turning point in American politics and in our history. And I feel like Barack Obama marks the change that we need to go forward. He will give our nation a new image in the world, something that we desperately need in this time of uncertainty, where our national image is, quite frankly, damaged from the last 8 years.
And what do you say to critics who say Barack Obama does not have enough experience?
Well, first of all, I wonder who they're comparing Barack Obama's experience to. If they're comparing it to Hillary Clinton, she's served longer than Barack Obama in the Senate, but before that, well, I don't consider being a spouse of the president experience necessarily. I mean, if you're the spouse of a quarterback on a football team, that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to call the plays and make the decisions on the field. It just doesn't match up for me. Moreover, I feel like Barack Obama has the vision that this nation needs to take our nation forward in this, frankly, uncertain time.
Now, do you think that Obama has, the right vision on foreign policy?
I do. I feel that Barack Obama will bring a new face to our American foreign policy, that he has the right vision to carry forward, and that he will be able to place advisors around him that are going to be able to give him the right cues, and that he's going to be able to listen to those advisors, something we haven't seen for the past 8 years. We've seen a president who surrounded himself with a lot of yes men. Barack Obama has consistently throughout his career debated the issues and brought people in from both sides of the aisle to get the best of both opinions and to make an informed decision based upon that.
I wanted to pause for a second and say that John has, worked with Congressman Mike Fitzpatrick, who is a Republican, and if you're supporting Barack Obama, it's interesting to see when you've been affiliated with the Republican Party why Barack Obama stands out to you.
It's true. I mean, I have been, and I'm still a registered Republican, but I believe that Barack Obama really, like I said, has the change and will bring the change to the presidency that we need in this nation. And I don't see that any of the Republicans in the field will be able to do that. We'll be able to repair our national image. And I feel like that is first and foremost on the list. I also feel like he's going to be able to bring a unity to Washington that we haven't been able to see and that no other candidate can really offer.
A lot of people say, well, Barack Obama's talking about change and he's saying this and that, and we need change that we can believe in, but he's not saying much. Do you get that impression at all, that he's not saying enough on the issues of the day?
Well, Nick, I mean, first of all, this campaign has gone on for a while, but we haven't gotten into the issues deep enough yet, I don't think. I think that as we move into the general election, as we move out of the primaries, we're going to see the issues start to emerge, and we're going to see the candidates define their issues more. And I think, frankly, that Barack Obama has the right ideas and the right vision, which is something I believe Hillary Clinton doesn't have. I believe that she doesn't have the right strategy going into it, and that, I think, is more important.
Let's think strategically for a moment. We have Electoral College still in place, which a lot of people are upset about still, but it's in place. Would you say that Barack Obama will be able to get as many states as John Kerry and then get the right amount of electoral votes, more than Kerry got, that's needed to take the presidency?
I do, and I think we've seen this so far in the primaries. Barack Obama has been able to build a broad coalition of whites, of blacks, of women, of men, Hispanics, Asians, and that we've been able to see him build a coalition of people and really unite different groups and unite Republicans and Democrats, as you see in my case, and be able to bring people out to the polls. And I think that if he is the Democratic nominee, that he'll be able to bring over a lot of Republicans, a lot of swing voters, and he'll be able to win the presidency with a healthy margin.
Now, when you look at the issue on the war in Iraq, you have Hillary, who voted initially to authorize the war, but you have Barack Obama, who wasn't in the Senate to be able to cast the vote.
Right.
His wife says he was actively speaking out against it.
Well, he
even
was.
when
He's been
in the
on
state
record.
Senate.
He's been on record. He made public speeches publicly opposing the war, which, as you remember, Nick, was not a popular thing to do.
Everyone was supporting it.
Everyone was supporting it.
Except Ron Paul and
But Barack Obama came out publicly when it was not the popular thing to do, and we look back, and the entire Democratic Party has come to his position on it. Now, if that's not foresight, if that's not leadership, and if that's not the sort of vision that we need in the White House, then frankly, I don't know what is.
Now, are there any other issues that you think he stands out on, such as economic issues?
Economic issues, I think he stands out on health care. Barack Obama wants universal health care, but he doesn't want to mandate it. He doesn't want to push it on people. He feels that people are going to be able to, if they can acquire health care, they're going to want to come forward and get it. I think that's an important difference. And I think that as voters, we need to really look at the plans that these candidates are putting forward. And they're very detailed plans. And that we need to really assess the kind of positions that our candidates are putting out there. I think Barack Obama has the best health care plan.
I got a chain letter as an email saying that Barack Obama is Muslim and he didn't put his hand on the Bible. He put it on the Quran when he swore in the state Senate, and people are actually believing this
I get
stuff.
about 6 of them a day.
It's amazing, and I went online and found a Newsweek article completely debunking in conjunction with factcheck.org that none of it was true. But people are actually believing this Muslim thing. What is your reaction to these emails going around already trying to smear
Well,
Barack
I think
Obama's
that
campaign?
I think that with any great leader, with any great agent of change, there's going to be a lot of opposition. Thankfully, we have the kind of resources available today to debunk that. But I think that as we move forward, we're going to need to overcome these obstacles. As both parties, we're going to need to seek out the truth and decide which candidate is the best. I think Barack Obama is clearly the best candidate, in my opinion, and he's the best one to take our nation forward.
All right, well, thank you very much, John, for coming on the show and talking about Barack Obama's
My
vision.
pleasure.
I'm Nicholas Balsi, and thanks for watching.